Hi everybody, it's been a minute. This is your video introduction to Herman Melville and Benito Cerino for our week of time spent on short fiction from the Romantic period. Herman Melville is a key figure of the American side of this movement that we're studying called Romanticism. In America, Romanticism starts and ends a little bit later than in England and the rest of Europe, so it's operating more through the second half of the 19th century. While Melville is arguably best known for his novels, especially Moby Dick, he also wrote just a huge canon of other influential works, including short stories like Bartleby the Scrivener and novellas like Benito Cerino, which was originally published in 1855. So again, a bit late if you're thinking about a European concept of Romanticism, but we're American this week. 4 things you should know about Benito Cerino. There are many, many more things that you should know about Benito Cerino, but 4 things for our purposes. The first being that Benito Cerino is just a really intricate, challenging, exciting text, and it richly rewards careful study. But at this level, in the time that we have for our class, what I'm really hoping to give you is a good first exposure to this piece. And hopefully some of you may like it well enough to revisit at some point, and I promise you, you will not be sorry. All that said, this is a first experience. It is important to read all the way to the end here. You really got to get to the very last period, in the words of Faulkner, the last ding-dong of doomsday to get the full impact of this story. 2. As a young man, Herman Melville worked as a sailor aboard various ocean-going ships like transatlantic voyages, trans-Pacific voyages for that matter, including 18 months that he spent aboard a whaling vessel, a whale hunting ship. So by the time he wrote this story, Benito Cerino, he had several years of direct personal experience of life at sea, and you'll see that direct knowledge reflected in the story. Third, and arguably most important, the characters and events represented in this story are all based on real people and true historical events. This novella is Melville's fictionalized account of things that really happened, but they really happened. You might be surprised to learn just how close to the record Melville has stayed at a lot of points in this story. And I'll say more about that in a moment. 4th and lastly, Benito Cerino is a textbook case study in a phenomenon that you're going to start to see everywhere once we've talked about this. I mean, it's going to be everywhere, and perhaps you've already studied this in high school. Benito Cerino is a case study in something called the Unreliable Narrator. And I just get a little chill even saying that. I'm very excited to work on it with all of you. So a little bit on the backstory behind Benito Cerino. Melville's background as a seaman really, it does come through in the vividness and the precision of detail in Benito Cerino, but that vividness is owing to more than just Melville's experience. The plot is based on true historical events that would have been reported in the news and that Melville would have read about and had sort of documentary access to. Captain Amasa Delano, our narrator for this story, was a real person, the captain of a ship called the Perseverance, which Melville has renamed the Bachelor's Delight, who experienced a version of the events that are adapted here in this novella in connection to a slave ship, which in reality was called the Trial. Melville renames it the San Dominic. One other little point that you should know, at this time in history, the country that's now called Haiti was called Saint-Domingue or Saint Domingo or San Dominic. Those are all sort of variations of the antiquated name for Haiti. So the slave ship was called the Trial. Melville renames it the San Dominic. And like the San Dominic in Melville's story, the Trial was commandeered by the Africans on board in what was termed a slave mutiny, right? These abducted people said, hell no, we won't go, and they did something about it. For those interested, especially if you think, maybe you might do a paper on Benito Cerino down the road, perhaps in term 2, I've uploaded a copy of the historical Captain Delano's direct testimony to the Files tab on Populi. Do note that the first half of this document is Captain Delano's first-person account, and the second half is a copy of the court report that was published concerning all that had happened. For our purposes, at least especially for this week, because it's a bit simpler to read and for the sake of brevity, I would recommend that you primarily focus on the court report, the second half beginning on, I think it's page 15. That's a bit of background. Let's talk about the Unreliable Narrator. Let's talk about it. 2 weeks ago, we had similarly kind of our first experience treatment with Afraben's novella Orinoco. And around our study of that text, we discussed some of the virtues and pitfalls of what might be termed allied literature, as opposed to own voices literature, like the autobiography of Ulauda Equiano, which we've also looked at. As we observed, the narrator in Orinoco makes some meaningful errors. A good example being when she conflates the name of her character's home country, which we would call Ghana, or which, Afraben should have called the Gold Coast. She conflates the name of her character's home country with the name of a colonial fort in the area, which was effectively a kind of HQ, a local headquarters for the slave trade. She calls it Coromantsin. Freaking messy. Details like that, compromising details like that, lead us to doubt the reliability of our narrator, the person walking us through the story. Not because the narrator is deceitful, but because the narrator has, in one way or another, a problematically limited perspective. And there are so many ways that different authors with different projects have sort of leveraged a character's problematically limited perspective. We'll come across that a few different times in our upcoming course readings. I believe I've put Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart in our supplementals. That's another just delightful example of an unreliable narrator, but I won't flog that point. In Orinoco, the narrator is unreliable because the author is unreliable, at least in certain respects, though she's not aware of that. Because of her Caribbean travels, Ben considers herself an implicitly reliable author, albeit she is naturally taking some creative liberties. And through her introduction, as we read, she explicitly states that her narrative is based on fact. She wants it to be viewed as kind of thinly veiled biography, or lightly adapted biography, embellished, so to speak. She intends her narrator to be kind of an echo of her own voice, someone for us to regard as similarly truthful, clear-eyed, reliable. She wants the reader to trust the perspective of the narrator and never be proved wrong in doing so. Now, whether or not she's successful in that, the project is to create a reliable narrator. Herman Melville's Benito Cerino, as we will discover, very different. That is not at all the project here. This story is also based on true historical events, adapted from. It's an imaginative dramatization of a real case where the imaginative elements are meant to sort of constitute a philosophical meditation on the significance of those historical events. But in this book, there is a clear distinction between the author and the narrator. Similar projects, very different goals with the narrator. The author is Herman Melville, duh. The narrator is Captain Amasa Delano. Delano is our eyes and ears in the narrative. We sit on his shoulder as he moves through the plot. We share in his insights, but we also, in large part, suffer his limitations. So it puts us as readers in a really interesting, kind of fun, demanding, sleuthy position. It takes a willful act of reading past our narrator to begin to piece together what's really happening in this story. You will have to read between the lines. You will have to look for what Delano does not see, for the things in his personality even, the things implicit to himself or his worldview that may be coloring the interpretation of things that he's giving you. As a character, Captain Delano is directly immersed in the events of the story as they're happening, and that's a pro and a con. Because he can only access them through his own limited personal perspective. Just like Aphra Behn, the writer, was immersed in the events of history as they were happening around her and to her and next to her, but she could only access them or process them through her limited experience and personal perspective. Here in Benito Cerino, Captain Delano believes himself an honest sort of person, and he trusts his own perspective. He thinks he's a good judge of character, and he's an experienced seaman. So, given his experience, he thinks he's a good judge of the situation playing out around him, mysterious as it may be. Your job, you have two jobs. Your first job will be to judge whether that's as accurate to reality as Captain Delano thinks it is. Sometimes it may be. He may be taking the measure of what's happening around him perfectly well. Sometimes he may not. It'll be up to you to judge, and that's kind of the fun of it. Your second job will be to sit back after you've got through this piece, and sometimes, maybe at intervals while you're reading, to sit back and put what you've read in a frame and ask yourself why Melville put us in the hands of this narrator. What effect did it have on... Oh no. Did I stop recording? Oh no, I'm still recording. I messed up the flow unnecessarily. Your second job will be to sit back, put everything you've read in a frame, and ask yourself why Melville put us in the hands of this narrator. What effect does it have on your experience of the story from start to finish? And what do you think might be different in a second reading, knowing what you know by the end? And I really better stop there if I'm not going to spoil anything for all of you while you're reading. But for a little more of a window into this question about what Melville is trying to tell us versus what we understand by sharing Captain Delano's perspective, click on over to my next video, Close Reading of Benito Cerino Opening Scene. There I do a close analysis for symbolism in the first few paragraphs of this story to help show you some of the little Easter eggs, the secret goodies that Melville has planted for us, maybe to pick up on, maybe not. And how those very first Easter eggs, so to speak, can kind of give us the clues that we need as to, one, what's about to happen in the plot, and two, the bald fact that everything may not be as it seems to our gregarious and open-hearted host, Captain Delano. Thanks for listening, and good luck.